Welcome to the Nock on Archery podcast, where we bring all archers and bow hunters together from all walks of life with the goal to educate, empower, and inspire you to be better both in the field and on the range. Yeah, you don't have to look at the camera. Is that wigging you out already?
I'm watching myself, yeah. Jocko bangs a knife on the table. I guess you know.
Yeah, you can see all the pound marks in there. Of course he does.
Of course he does.
Yeah. Maybe I should just dry fire a bow to like get the sound check. That would be awesome. We walked in the podcast room. Welcome, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You like it?
It's pretty cool. There's some neat stuff in here.
Yeah, you got to get closer.
All right, let's scoot closer.
Yeah, pretend like this is jiu-jitsu. You got to get in there.
Okay.
You know what the hardest part of this podcast is going to be? Is to get you to actually talk about stuff that everybody should know about you.
Okay.
So last night, you were talking to Harry, and I was telling him, she's a freaking badass, dude. And he's just like, oh yeah, and I'm like, yeah. And I like kind of started to tell him about some of your accolades, and he just like looked at me all adult like and just goes, let her tell her story herself, bro. I'm just like, I said, all right, well, you're probably not going to get it out of her on her own. She's not going to just come out and tell you. He's just like, we'll see what happens. And I was just like, okay, well, let me get out of this debate. Yeah, because you and Harry have a lot in common. So we might as well back up. What's your schooling?
I did an undergrad in biology, and then I did some graduate work in environmental education, pretty much.
So in high school, what were your main sports? Were you super athletic in high school?
Yes. I was a gymnast for a long time, and I got really tall, and I wish someone had sat me down and said, hey, you are way too big for this.
See, I told Leah, I feel like she's actually like, she's more stacked than Andy.
That is not true.
I was going to guess swimming with like your shoulders, because you have just like really broad shoulders, you know, and I think that posture, I think that's why people think that I'm big. I think it's just my shoulders. It's nothing else.
You're 6'5". That's really big. Like a forest giant.
So you did gymnastics?
I did gymnastics through most of high school, and I played softball. I did I think I did one season of track. But there was always something. I was snowboarding. You know, it was like 3 seasons of something.
Where did you grow up?
Upstate New York.
Oh, so you boarded up there?
Mm-hmm.
How were the hills, like upstate New York? I've never been up there. Now that you live in like
Montana.
Yeah.
Well, we were lucky because there was a little tiny ski hill like 15 minutes from our house, but it was like 500 feet of vert. It had a cornfield at the top, which I never thought was odd until I got out of upstate New York.
That's me. Like I worked and skied at this little slope called Wilmot Mountain. And I mean, I loved going there, and it was, you know, the lift ride. Looking back, it can't be more than like 300 or 400 yards up there.
Yeah.
And then it would just be like 15 seconds of bombing moguls, and then you're like back in line and going up. That's what my hill was, but I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. No.
But truthfully, it's honestly a very good representation. I feel like I got pretty good at skiing, and it was because it was so repetitive. You know, you're able to get more in, and it was probably better for like touch and go. You know, it was like you get to like rip some moguls, but your legs wouldn't be burned out before you got to the bottom, and then you would take that ride up. It was probably really good drills, you know, truthfully, compared to learning out west where you can take 20 minutes to get down.
Yeah. No, we would go bell to bell, my sisters and I, and just 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. night skiing.
How many sisters you got?
I have one sister. At the time, I had some stepsisters too.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. So there were 4 of us total that I grew up with anyway.
Was snowboarding new?
Yes.
Because I remember getting a snowboard. It was actually an OP snowboard. It was an Ocean Pacific snowboard. I don't even know. It was almost like I won it in some kind of a weird, you know, when you go into gas stations and you fill out your name and you fold it up and put it in that box. Like, I didn't realize back then that meant everybody had your information. you know, and luckily there weren't timeshares. It was a legit, it was more like, it was something from like, you know, Mountain Dew or something. And it was like something like that. And so they drew it. And I remember coming in and the clerk goes, you know, hey, are you Dudley? And I go, yeah. He goes, hey, you won that thing for like the 12 pack of Mountain Dew and this snowboard. And it just had like the old crappy, like flip up bindings.
Yes.
And I don't even know if they had proper snowboarding boots then. I think you just got your moon boots and like went in.
Just barely. I mean, they weren't much off snowmobiling boots at the time.
Yeah.
And then, we had a directional K2. It was like one of the first K2 snowboards. So it was flat on one side. And it was old even when we got a hold of it. My mom found it at a garage sale and was like, here, you know.
Nice.
And it had the wire bail bindings that you would flip.
So okay.
If you landed hard, they would just all fly open, and you just had to kind of manage after that. But I actually found that board. A friend found it for me on eBay, and I got it for my sister again, and she was so excited.
Wait, you found an OG one?
Yeah, we found it was the same board. It was a different size, but she was all pregnant. You know, it was when it wasn't that long ago. She like ugly cried. She's like, I never thought I'd see this board again. She was so excited.
I'm going to try to do that for Sharon for roller skates.
Yes.
Yeah. She like talks about these roller skates that she used to have, and she described them to a T. Like mine were this color with like these stripes down the side, and she calls them roller boots. Like that's what they call them. So we Googled them and found a pair, and I'm like, oh dang, there's some out there.
The nostalgia is deep. I mean, I hated that board at the time. It was so stiff. It was flat on one side, so you couldn't ride switch. You know, I was glad to get rid of it, but she really, you know, she's like, it was our first board.
Yeah,
yeah.
You know, it's going back to your parents' house is always good to find something in there to where you're like, oh my gosh, I used to have this thing.
Yeah.
And then you realize how dumb you looked in it. So I went skiing probably, I would guess it was like 5 or 6 years ago. Someone in Utah, I went to, you know, I've got a lot of people I'm friends with in Utah. So I went back and they said, oh, we're going to be skiing this weekend. And this was before I learned to board with Andy. So I said, oh, I guess I could ski. And they're like, really? You can ski? And I actually still have my skis. If I go up in my garage attic, I can grab them for you. But this was probably only like 5 or 6 years ago. So it was like a few years before I snowboarded with Andy. So I roll up to Park City or wherever I skied. It was like Snowbird or Park City. I roll up with like my K2 Extreme freaking 208s. You know, which is skis that are a little taller than me, which were cool at the time because you could like follow your tips.
Totally
but they're
straight.
like, yeah, they're about as thick. I mean, I would say my iPhone is thicker than those skis were back then. And then I had like, you know, my like Flow pink and yellow Degree 7 suit and like my Reichley boots, you know.
God.
And I just showed up, and like when I came like walking out holding those things, people were looking at me and going like, right on, bro. Like they thought like this dude has like shredded all these, you know, freaking new like short profile, you know, skis and everything. And he's like bringing it back old school, you know, like the guys that do, what is the like, it's like
telly ski.
Yeah. Yeah. They thought I was like one of those dudes just bringing it back
just
from
analog.
the 80s. Yeah. And I was just thinking like,
this
isn't
gear.
Yeah, this isn't cool.
It wasn't ironic.
What are you talking about? How important do you think some of that that early sport was to like kind of building your mindset to where you are now as an athlete? Because you're, in my opinion, you're a super athlete, because I've not only seen you a little bit in what you do for your main job, but also once you have a student, obviously you learn a lot about a student being a teacher, especially if you're like paying attention to them. So I always say there's like people that are 100%, you know, right away, they're going to be really good students, and they could even push it to the point where they teach you something eventually. And I see that in you too, because you're very in depth and thorough. So I feel like you'll probably bring things up to me that I wouldn't have otherwise thought to like say, oh, okay, you're going that far deep.
Wow. Like I don't know about that, but I
like
appreciate
last
that.
night, you know, I've never had a student that like made me go downstairs and you didn't make me, but I did it because I saw that you were making notes and drawing a bow and every accessory and everything, and like making little lines of, this is a cable, this is a string, these are speed knocks, these are knocking points, this is a D loop. And you were looking to say, like, you were Googling what all those pieces are. So then I finally said, let me just go get a bow and I'll walk you through all this stuff, which most people, they're just thinking pull back and shoot. But you're going into the technical side, which for some people can be good, some people can be bad. For you, I think it'll be good because I don't think you're going to be over analytical about it. But there's some students that I almost don't want to know how to work on their equipment because they put the equipment ahead of the process. And so then, have you ever had that where, it's like people are getting further down the fundamentals to where it's going to be problematic. And anytime you have like technical gear that goes with that, I feel like you can become more of a gear junkie than a process person. Yes. And, for me, the process has always been the key thing,
Yeah, for jiu-jitsu, there's just so much information available now that you can jump to some really complex things without understanding how they work, and then you don't have a foundation for it.
Yeah.
So they're focusing on...
Is it trouble for injury, too, more so than just...
So it can be. If you don't... I mean, we have a rule now. We do a session with a student before they do open mat, so they understand the etiquette and just some of the safety rules. But one of the rules is if you see something on YouTube, you need to run it by a coach and have us help you learn it before you try it on someone. Yeah. And there's a reason we have that rule, So we had to, more than once, but one in particular, a guy learned something the night before his first open mat and tore a guy's knee, who had a physical job and was out of work, couldn't walk. And it was like, of course he felt horrible, but it was like he picked something up on YouTube.
That's my biggest nightmare right there. Like I'll relive that. Like, damn it. Yeah. I got paired up with this YouTube dude.
The YouTube guy, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we try a reverse shoulder lock.
Oh man, yeah.
Dudley's got long enough arms. I can try it on him.
We have that rule for a reason. It's really rare that something like that happens, but I do mention it every time now because it's just not necessary. People they're like, oh look, I can learn this thing that maybe coach isn't going to show me for a while, and they don't know how to apply it. They don't know what it feels like. You should have it done to you. If you're going to do it to someone else.
What does your water bottle say on that other side?
It says, perfect the craft.
I love that.
Judo and jiu-jitsu. It's a Dojo Outfitters sticker. Some of my friends that own one of the only brick and mortar gi shops actually in the world in Portland, Oregon. And they are very detail-oriented, just process-oriented people, both really proficient in both judo and jiu-jitsu, and That's
a good saying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so relevant to archery too, because I mean, a lot of times when you start archery, like you already have an edge. It seems like you have to polish more than you have to take off meat. You know what I mean? It seems like right away, if you get the right instruction and if your equipment is fit to you when you start, it seems like there's a lot of just like honing more so than, you have to like do something lightly so much to where it becomes polished. You just have to perfect it over time versus there's not like a major cheat like way where you can just grind off a whole bunch of stuff to get to an edge. You kind of just need to polish a lot.
Yeah, everyone wants to learn that life hack, and it's like it actually is just hours. It's just hours and repetition, and then being in front of someone that knows what to correct at the right time, too.
Yeah, that's so true. You guys have the best. I loved the environment. Like when I go up to SBG with Andy, the environment makes me want it makes me want to wait for that type of environment before I go like deep head first, which is a compliment obviously to you guys. Now, did you do any sports in college?
Not really. I can't say that. I did karate. Okay. I got a black belt in karate.
Okay. You did?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice.
There's a lot of, there was no jujitsu really on the East Coast where I went to school. So my mom got into martial arts and she wanted me to have some self-defense. So she got me into karate, and I was kind of craving that sport environment. And I think my last school sport I did was diving. Actually, I really enjoyed diving because it's like gymnastics, but when you hit the water, if you mess up, you just smack. You don't land on the ground crumpled, or break something. So I'm like, oh, this is great.
It's not parkour.
No, this is fine. If you mess up, you just fall in the water. I didn't care about slapping at all. And so I enjoyed that, and I loved the practice, and it was always part of my life. And then you graduate and you're like, well, I'm not going to do diving in college. What am I going to do? So there was a karate club, and I had just gotten into it as I was leaving home. So I got pretty into karate, and karate is more of, most schools anyway, are more of an art than
forms.
A fight. Yeah, so or katas, which was a lot like gymnastics.
I was in karate for quite a while.
Yeah,
actually,
okay.
I've never even said that, but yeah, it's
amazing.
It's more forms and katas and stuff. Do you remember any of them?
I remember some of them, and it, when I first started, you could compete, and if you could do flips and stuff, I could still do some flips at the time. Yeah. You did pretty well if you could kick high and do flips, and I tell the story, I did my black belt test, and there was a self-defense component to it, and everything was off of one punch. It was very choreographed. You knew which hand your partner was punching with usually, but there was a part of the test at the end where it was a little more freeform, and one of the students punched me twice. So my first one I blocked, and it was this beautiful block, and then the second one he just punched me in the face, and I was like, ah! And I was like, oh, that's not great, so I had a black eye the next day for my karate test, and the coaches were mad. They gave him push-ups, but in my mind, I'm like, shouldn't I be able to deal with more than one punch? What if someone throws a second punch, your hand's totally down, and you're doing this cool block with the other hand, and it's like, what are they going to do with their other arm? Punch you in the face?
That was so true. It was very much like a one strike. You had
do all this cool stuff while they just stand there.
Yeah, you could do all that stuff. Well,
there was some throwing too, so there was a little bit of grappling. It was a mixed style of martial arts that I realized was pretty specific to upstate New York, which happened. That someone made their own style, which the idea was, it was a precursor to kind of what I got into. And when I started traveling, I just did whatever little martial arts school was where I was, because I was a ranger. I was a wilderness ranger for a while, and I was just trying. I did kung fu, I did taekwondo, I did aikido, I did whatever was there, and I was looking for something that was, as physically demanding as the sports I had done, but also had, the mental component and was more functional.
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon jiu-jitsu. I was in a rec center in Alaska, and they had a random class that I ran into before I came down to Montana. And my coach, Travis, just happened to be opening the first SBG in Kalispell, Montana when I came back down, because I was like, there's not going to be.
Was that the first?
Our headquarters is in Portland, Oregon, with Matt Thornton, and Travis and his brother had gotten their black belts. They were the first white to black belts from the Portland gym, and so he had broken off. I think he was a brown belt at the time, and he happened to be starting this little jiu-jitsu gym. I was one of his first 6 students, and I was calling him all the time because he was opening it. He was renovating a new space, and I was like, when are you starting? When are you going to do it? I was kind of hooked already, and I was like, this is what I've been looking for. It's functional, it's hard. And then SBG really matched with just kind of, I had tried all these martial arts, and I was realizing they were just style differences. They weren't function differences. Yeah. And I was like, I want something that's functional that you can test. And that was kind of the idea for SBG. It was forerunner to mixed martial arts, that if something works, you use it, and if it doesn't work, you don't use it, and you should be able to test it.
Yeah.
I really liked that. It was very much in line with my science background, and then just trying all these different styles. I was like, I just want something that works, and you can see if it works. And in jiu-jitsu, if you can do something or not, and against what size person and what strength, like what can you pull off? There's no kind of lying about it.
Have you brought it full circle back to your mom to say like, hey, you I know you're into self-defense and you wanted that for us, but
oh man,
the karate was cool, but jiu-jitsu is a totally different beast.
She went deep down the traditional martial arts rabbit hole, and she's an artist. She's a really good painter, and she loves the performance part of it. She loves the tradition part of it. So she got 4th or 5th degree in karate, and then she started Aikido, which is similar. And I did some Aikido too. It's all off sword movements, but your partner has to attack you with a lot of energy and momentum to make anything work. And in a really specific way. So it ends up being kind of choreographed. They get good at falling, you know, just like judo. So she got her black belt in that, and she did some Iaido too, which is traditional sword kata, you know, Japanese sword.
So in your house, do you have like some fans and swords and shit on the wall?
At her house, yeah. At her house, yeah. So she got pretty into that, and she did do a jiu-jitsu class with me in Portland. It was when she was a little older, and she's like, oh yeah, this is cool. You know, if she'd been a little younger, I think she would have enjoyed doing it. She didn't really like sparring though, even in karate. So I don't know if she would have gone that far with it, but she got me into it, you know? So, we talked about
That's
it.
Pretty cool. So did the other sisters do it, like kind of have that same option, or were you kind of like selected like, hey, tough stuff, we kind of feel like this would be a good thing for you?
She wanted us to do it for self-defense. So at first my little sister did it, and she was not into it. You know, it was just not her thing. You know, she did track, and she was not into confrontation or fighting or anything like that. So she's, you know, always been really supportive of my journey, but it was just not her thing. My mom did have me teach one time at her Aikido school. I think it was like a purple belt, and she wanted me to teach something. I was like, I really don't want to go at this point. I understood the difference, and you just go to practice. I'll be fine. I was visiting, and she had me teach, and I said, well, I'll teach a cross collar choke, you know, for mount. And none of them had ever done chokes, even though they worn a gi for 20 years or whatever. Didn't know how to choke with the collar. And there was a man in the class that was athletic, and he was a little younger, and there was all these older people, and he wasn't a great partner for Aikido. So he would resist the techniques, especially when my mom would try to do it. Yeah. Instead of just going with it or throwing himself, you know, which you kind of have to. And he was on top of an older guy, or he was on the bottom, and he said, I would never be in this position. You know, he's in mount bottom. I would never let this happen. I would never be in this position. And I was like, well, what would you do? He's like, I would just throw him off. You know, he does what everyone does and just tried to shove him. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you let him do the choke? He's like, it's not working. It doesn't work. And I said, okay, I'm going to get on top of you. I'm going to do the choke. And remember, you got to tap, you know, when you feel it. And he just sat there, and I was like, is this not working? You know, the whole class is watching me. They're all standing around us. And I looked down at him, and I realized he was out. He was unconscious, but his eyes were open, and he was just staring. And I was like, oh no. And I got off of him, and there was this, at the time I thought if people would grab someone's legs, if they went out and try to like move the blood back to their head. So I went down, and I was like shaking his legs, try to get him to wake up. And you wake up and you do this agonal breathing, you know, you go like, and so he starts, they're like, what's wrong? What's he doing? I'm like, he's unconscious. They're like, oh my goodness. You know, they're like, what's going on? Yes. And he woke up, and he's like, oh. I was like, are you all right? And he's like, why wouldn't I be? And he's like, you don't know you lost time. But I'm like, otherwise I would have teleported to his feet, you know? And he was just like, oh my God. And I asked my mom what happened to him, and she's like, he quit like a week later. He didn't come back. Oh, damn. He was done with it.
Yeah. He's never living that one down. That's awesome. So once you, so did Travis open the first official Kalispell one, and then at that point were you just like everything else just gets pushed to the side? This is
not totally. I was so into snowboarding at the time. You know, I was an instructor for about 16 winters, you know, and that's one of the big reasons I moved to Montana, was just to snowboard. My sister came out and lived with me for a season. I was like, we made it, you know, came from the cornfield. Now we're here, you know, and she ended up going back to New York. I was like, no, this is where we're supposed to be. You know, it was amazing. We were both instructors. It was a lot of fun. But
did you learn your instruction from whoever taught you snowboarding, or did you ever take any type of like teaching type classes in school?
So I did go through, there were levels of certification to be a snowboard instructor. Mm-hmm. So I got to like level 2, you know, and worked toward the level 3. I didn't quite get there. So some teaching there. And then my mom was a teacher growing up. So it was just kind of, you know.
Who did it? Was it like the ski patrol kind of?
No. There's a whole there's a national association of ski and snowboard instructors. So there's a really rigorous testing process to become a certain level of instructor now.
See, I remember when snowboarding in some ways was like skating in some ways, when the fact that like some mountains did not want to snowboard. And I remember hearing like, freaking snowboard, they wreck all the snow.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was like that whole time where snowboarders had a specific run they could use, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, and now you go and like the tides have really turned.
There's still a few mountains where you're not allowed to snowboard.
Is there?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always a few of those old timers out there just pushing it through.
Yeah. No, when I started teaching, I was 16, and it was like there were no other people who could snowboard, or just not many, you know. So they're like, we'll let these kids teach people how to snowboard, you know. And snow was super hard, you know, and we're hiking up this little hill next to the lodge. And I got a lot better at I had a lot more instruction on how to teach when I came out west, because they have such a better, you know, they have a better process now.
Imagine being an adult size and skiing on that crap that we had to ski, like, because Wilmot Mountain was pretty much an ice cube.
Yes, ice coast.
With like shaved ice on the top of it. And occasionally, like twice a year, you'd get 6 inches of snow, and you'd just be like, we got powder.
Yeah. No,
and it just meant your moguls had like, you know, enough dust on the top to where when you hit the ice bucket, you know, the ice ball, it like some snow would blow off. My skis were always stress fractured across it. Were yours like on the tips where they're just slapping and like cracking backwards?
I don't think we probably rode the same way.
Oh, really?
No, that's my guess. You were putting a little more strain on your equipment.
Yeah, that's the story of my life for sure.
Well,
so then when did you just go full on, like, I know jiu-jitsu is where I'm going?
Well,
was it a certain belt or a certain rank?
Yeah, it was a long process. I went, so you asked about teaching. So I taught snowboarding, and then I did environmental education. So I got a graduate degree in environmental education. And the economy kind of tanked. And they were like, we're not really hiring people to do that anymore. Like, I was a wilderness ranger, and I was doing education classes, and those jobs were so hard to find. Like, they were just kind of shrinking. So I said, I'll go back to school for classroom science teaching. So I went to Portland, and I could still train jiu-jitsu there at our headquarters. And
what rank were you by then? Like, what?
I was a blue belt when I came out of Montana.
Okay.
And I wanted to keep training, but I was still snowboarding a lot. And, you know, I knew I was going to keep doing it, but I had no idea it would be a career. You know, I was pretty into it at the time, but I started taking it more and more seriously, and I finished my graduate degree, and I started classroom teaching in Portland. So I was teaching science. I was teaching high school biology and environmental science, and ornithology for a little bit, some other things. But it was just for, you know, and it was so hard, and I was doing too much on top of it. I was still teaching snowboarding lessons at Mount Hood, and I was trying to train for Worlds in jiu-jitsu. And of course, you can imagine, like, that year, everything didn't go as planned.
Yeah.
And I didn't get asked back to the teaching job. I wasn't very happy doing it either.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to lose the snowboarding, because it was the only time I was going outside, really. And you're driving an hour and a half up to Mount Hood to teach. And so that was pretty extreme. And they were so short on instructors. We had a couple bad snow years. I ended up teaching skiing. My last lesson I taught, it was like skiing in the rain, and the kid didn't really want to be there. And I was like, I think I might be done with this, you know? And then, I was teaching, and I didn't get asked back to that job. And I was a brown belt at the time. I hurt my knee pretty badly, because I was training so hard on top of everything else. And Matt takes all of his brown belts to Europe, and you go roll there. And it's like, he wants to see how you're going to do there. You get more integrated into the global organization. You help teach seminars. It's kind of a rite of passage for his black belts. And so I went with him, and my knee was jacked up, but I was still rolling. I just kind of put a brace on it, and I developed this kind of, I was just rolling around it basically. And I did pretty well, you know. And we were in Ireland and England, and so that was kind of the pivotal point for me. So the teaching job wasn't there anymore. I was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do after this. I have this degree, and I thought that was going to be my way to kind of have a more stable life. But being back in a classroom, like, I didn't love high school. You know, it just, you're back in there, you're on that schedule.
I like the gym, and I like the practice fields.
Yeah, the sports. Yeah. And it was like, I'm teaching students, you know, the science curriculum hasn't changed since we were in high school. So I was teaching the same things in the same order. You spend so much time on cell biology and learning the parts of the cell. I don't know that this is helping prepare these kids for life. And a lot of them kind of knew they didn't need to know it, so they didn't really want to be there. You know, you're trying to teach kids 90 new vocabulary words in a week and then test them on it. Some of them don't even speak English. You know, I was just like, I don't know if I'm really helping them.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm doing that more with jiu-jitsu, to be honest. Like the people who come in there and the kids, particularly the women, I feel like they're better for having trained with me.
Oh, yeah.
And they're coming there for a reason. They're searching for something. They're trying to get something out of it. So I feel like I'm having more of an impact on the people around me teaching jiu-jitsu than I was teaching science. So
how much have you guys had to tailor the, like, I would say the kids? Because I mean, you deal with some kids where I think, okay, that they're teen, like at that point, they're just like roughhousing kind of in a organized manner. I mean, how much of that do you just kind of teach them rolls or teach them flips? Like, how deep do you go with the younger kids? Is there a certain like age category where you say, okay, this kind of starts a different approach to the training, or is it very similar regardless of age category?
It's very age specific. We have a program actually called Growing Gorillas that is written out of the Montana gym. That was one of the reasons. Montana was my home gym. And, you know, after that summer, Travis called me and he said, you know, I have a full-time coaching position available. You could help manage, you know, and compete full-time, because that was something I always wanted to do, but just I'd always been working or grad school and I'd competed a lot, but it was always in between. It wasn't my focus. So I was like, okay, I'm going to come train full-time and coach full-time and really take this seriously. And the other thing they were doing out of that gym is the Growing Gorillas curriculum. And it's specific to every 2 years of age. And, you know, I'd gone to school to be a teacher. Child development is really important in what kids can learn at each phase. And I had touched on it in snowboarding too. So what kids are physically capable of and mentally capable of at each year of age changes. So if you understand that, you can tailor the curriculum to what they're doing. So we start them at 3, and we have a class for every 2 years of age up till 13 to 15 or like 16 or 17 is the teen class is a bigger span. And we have 3 and 4 year olds, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 10 to 12. And each class is a very different ecosystem, very different approach, but we're following the same curriculum, but we're just tailoring it to what they're able to do. For example, the 3 to 5 year olds, 3 to 5, their heads are bigger. You know, they don't have a lot of core strength. Their fine motor coordination isn't where it is going to be in a few years. And they more and more get into their adult body and they're able to do some more intricate things. But the bigger movements, the gross movement and helping them get to those developmental milestones faster can happen through jiu-jitsu, through their warm-ups. You know, they're learning cooperation. There's a social, emotional component to it as well. They're around other kids. They're learning to cooperate. They're learning to... There's
structure and discipline within the class, which I kind of feel like a big reason why I liked sport and was always in so many different ones is because I really feel now like I like the structure and the routine to it more so than... Shouldn't say more so, but that was just a big key factor because I came from a home where there wasn't like a super structured schedule.
Right.
I was on my own a lot. So I think having a routine was something that I didn't know that I liked because I needed it. But I think it's just key. Like, and not to mention, now that honestly, since I've seen Sharon as a mom, because Sharon is, an awesome mom. And I know everyone says that about their mom, but she is really good about, like her discipline and her reinforcement. She's never had to like be physical for like getting the result. She's just very, very, she knows the importance of consistency and like not continually like giving warnings, and then somehow without knowing it, giving a reward. Like, you know what I mean? So, it's pretty cool to watch, you know, that. And I think, for me, most teachers would have said, oh, he's ADD, HD, like, you know, just medicate this kid and just chill them the freak out, and the truth is I actually just needed structure.
Yeah.
I think because I got in trouble less because I knew that I wouldn't be able to play if I got in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our program, when they earn a belt, their teacher has to sign off on it and their parents. So they have to be doing well at home. They have to be doing well in school. And I get to coach those kids for multiple years too, which as a teacher, as a high school teacher, you get to see them for one period a day just for that 1 year. And you might not see them again. It can have a big impact, but that's it. And for jiu-jitsu, these kids stay at the school. I've been teaching full time for about 6 years, and I've had some of the kids for that whole time, and I've gotten to watch them grow from being little guys into teenagers, and how their jiu-jitsu changed, how they've changed socially and how they've grown. That's really cool for me.
It's so rewarding as a teacher. I honestly wish I could go back to some of the teachers that I took serious and stuff, because once I left high school, I was gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've only been back to my whole hometown like maybe once, mm-hmm. maybe 2 days. So I've never got to go and talk to some of these teachers. Some of them, it would be nice for them to know, okay, this kid didn't, end up being dead somewhere in a dumpster.
I think you can
because there are things that I never told teachers. I know you don't think that I heard you, but that some of those things actually did sink in. Mm-hmm. I would love to go back to my English teacher and show him how many things I've written, and and show him I've done hundreds and hundreds of articles and stuff like that. Or I'd love to go back to a graphic arts class and just kind of say hey, here's from a marketing aspect, because I never had education past school. Everything mm-hmm. has always been learning in the field.
Yeah.
So, my first job was at a bow company when I was 18 years old. So as soon as I got out, I started my shop right when I turned 18, because I have a late birthday. My birthday's in June, so in a couple of weeks. So I had graduated, had my birthday, and then between me, technically when I was recruited for college, I was still 17. So then I turned 18. Then by the time I did the archery shop and kind of come all the way around to about May of that next year, I'd opened my own archery shop. Mm-hmm. By that point I'd worked for an archery shop, then, ended up realizing they weren't as customer service focused as what I'd want. So then I opened my own archery shop, which was small. I had $5,000, and I think I bought 7 bows and 7 dozen arrows, and just started kind of doing what I do now, just on a smaller, a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
And then ended up getting kind of seen by Joel Maxfield and Matt McPherson, and they ended up just seeing how I interacted with people about archery, mm-hmm. and then offered me, a job at Matthews when they were still, really small at the time. And so everything I've learned wasn't through a school system, really, because I only did enough school to be eligible for sports.
Yeah.
But there were still nuggets. There were still seeds that I realized that kind of, they were growing roots more so than tops. I think, there's certain legumes that do that, right? Or especially native grasses. Mm-hmm. It's they don't, if you plant switchgrass or a big blue, which, is a really awesome, pretty tall grass with cover, it doesn't look like that until the third year in, because it's just establishing root base.
Yeah.
So you're not actually seeing a result, but there's foundation solidifying in. And I think some of the lessons that teachers would say to me or coaches would say, I think that stuff was in my head, and then it was kind of there, and then other things were fertilizing it later on in life, to where it started to establish, and then I started to realize what they meant by it, and then I started to apply it.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm having gone to so much school, I'm less enchanted by it, and you get some guidelines, some framework, some understanding, but you really have to go out and apply it. And that's where you really start learning everything. And it was obvious from your progression that you've taught so many beginners. And I think the beginner progression is the most important because that's where you establish the fundamentals. And people think, that, oh, it's so easy to teach beginners, and it's like, it's a blank slate. So you have to show them everything. And then what they do after that is going to be based on what you showed them. So it affects actually the rest of their career in that sport. So I think that's actually the most important step.
How much have you guys learned over time to boil those processes down? Like if you look at, hey, when we were taught, we were shown this and then this and then this and then this. And then, when in the end, we should have just learned this first, then we could have done this next. And then like all these other things would have just made more sense. Have you guys done that over time? Because I know I have,
yes,
like
absolutely.
as a coach or as someone that does seminars, because I used to go to a seminar and just want to like give a lot of information that I think was information people maybe didn't hear. Mm-hmm. But then it got to the point where I'm like, I need to give information that gives a change, that gives an impact, because then they come back and then you can start, kind of progressing things along.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you're an animal. At every sport and now archery. So
I don't know about that.
Let's get into the archery thing. So you're technically an archer, because you've shot arrows just like like when I was on Jocko's podcast and he's like, well, you did surf. I mean, you got up and you paddled out, you got on top of the wave. No one was touching your board. You got up, like you surfed. So you've pulled a bow back, you've let off the safety, you've pulled through a release, and you have shot archery. So coming from someone that's obviously done a lot of rad things, what do you think? Well,
I enjoyed it a lot. Like I said, I was super fortunate to be able to learn from you, your experience level, but just I could tell you taught so many beginners. And the way we used to teach jiu-jitsu is you would just come in and you would just roll. You would just do a full-on match your first day, and you either liked it or you left. And most people did not stick around, especially women. And now we have a beginner class where you just drill and you learn the building blocks. So you have some kind of a structure. You do a session with a coach in between, and then you do your first live matches. And it's like a months-long process. And when we first started doing that,
called Foundation?
Yeah, Foundations class in our school. And when we first started doing that, I'm like, oh, it's going to make people soft. They're not going to understand how to roll, and it's not going to work. And people are just so much better. They're so much better. It's so much safer. We're keeping people who normally would not have made it through those initial hard matches, not knowing what they're doing. We're keeping people who weren't necessarily athletes. They're smaller. We have people who are older, people who are women who can get lots of benefit out of jiu-jitsu, but just wouldn't have done it. And so when we came in and you handed us just the shot trainer, I'm sure some people would have been super frustrated. Like, I came here to shoot a bow, not stand here with a string on a chalk line, and I was actually so glad. I was like, that's too much to start with. And I was like, I feel like we can kind of build up some of the necessary fundamentals before we try it and might have a chance of doing okay. It would have been hard to be handed a bow, but I'm sure that's the way it used to be done. Like, you just walk up and they're like, here's a compound bow. This is what you do. And you just try to shoot it. And I'm sure that didn't necessarily go well.
I was handed like a man's bow, as a kid. And it's just like, okay, try to
just figure
out how to pull this thing back. Yeah. I mean, I had to pull mine back with like my feet. Like I couldn't even get it back, but like with you guys, and we had 3 people all learning. So yeah, I kind of gave you a release and gave you a string more as a distraction to know, like, there's hope. We're gonna do something with this today. But there was quite a bit of time that we had to put into building other steps before you finally like realized, I get to use this release.
Yeah, I mean, the release there's some critical bad things that can happen if you let go of it. You're telling those stories, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine if you just handed someone that right off. I feel like they would absolutely blow their bow apart or just
sometimes
or something
people
else.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes people do, and you know, the honest ones get further along when they just say like, yeah, I did this, and it's like, okay, well, that's not good, but you know, it's fixable. You know, at least it's fixable, and we can move forward. What are some of your biggest takeaways
from the archery lesson?
Tip that up a little bit so you're like talking right into it.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. One, I mean, it's very posture based, which a lot of jujitsu is too. You have to be able to keep your structure under pressure, under force.
Yeah.
Just like when you're trying to pull the bow back. And if, you know, a lot of the common errors that you mentioned, the hitching, the crowding of the shoulder, it's a posture break.
Yeah.
And then that force is getting funneled into a part of your body that could later cause injury, but is also messing up your shot. So there were some similarities, some correlations there that I could kind of follow and understand. Doing it, of course, is a whole other story. So that's going to take a lot of practice. So very posture based, more technique than strength in a lot of ways to pull the bow back from what you were describing, and even got easier in just a few shots we did. Just if you're doing it right, and something you said to make a bad shot is really hard. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so that really resonated because jujitsu is like that too. And, you know, if you're holding on really tight, which is it's instinctive for new people in jiu-jitsu. They want to clench their fists and hold, and everything's so tense. And then their jiu-jitsu it's not good. And you'll have people tell them, relax, but you can't relax everything or it falls apart. So you have to figure out what structure you need to hold and what you need to let go of, you know? And so for the archery, it was like that too. The grips, especially, you're like, well, you have to hold on to the release, but your hand can't be a claw. You know, the claw hand does not help you, but you won't let go of the release, but it's not, you have to find that happy medium. So there was some similarities there too, just what's instinctive versus what is technical and what's going to actually help your shots.
Yeah. There's so many parallels because, when Andy and I were talking, we were talking about skydiving and, you know, the fact that, you know, you're talking maneuvers and how that affects yourself in a wind tunnel or, you know, if you're falling out of the sky. But one of the hardest things is like, if you're like not trying to fight the wind, because you're not going to win.
Right.
You know, what you want to try to do is you want to try to maneuver this force that's happening. You know, there's a force that's happening and you want to learn to maneuver it. So yeah, you know, death gripping the bow is problematic,
right?
You know, making, you know, holding on to the release is important, but like, you know, pretty much making a fist on the release is problematic.
Yeah.
So there's so many parallels to things that you have to have control, but you have to have like managed control. I don't know. You have to have finesse, you know, and that's one of the things. And I assume I've never got good enough at golf to like know that, but I assume with golf, you know, once you start to become very fluid, you almost become more efficient at it.
Yes.
You know, and that's one of the things I talk to you guys about is just the efficiency of a good shot is almost a surprise because of how easy it was. And those are the shots when everything was actually right, even though, you know, for me, I feel like I remember specifically when I didn't know what a good shot was and I was trying to find it. I remember having those ones where I thought they just went too soon or like, oh, it surprised me. And I'm like, oh man, where's that? Oh, it's in the middle. That's strange. But the truth is I had tripped over good shots. Like I just happened to like trip over something that was right. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. It just kind of happened. And a lot of times on day 2, that happens to archers, you know, because they spend a lot of time thinking about it. And the visualization is key in any sport, right? So I think, you know, for you were already taking notes this morning. I'm sure, you know, the others are doing the same and thinking about it. So a lot of times when you pick it up on day 2, there's some things where you're like, oh man, how do I do this again? And there's a few of those, but then there's also just this small window where it's just like, okay, you showed all of your potential because things were happening without you over analyzing and overthinking it. And then once you realize you do it good, you're like, oh, do it just like that, and I'll repeat it. It always happens when people shoot their first good group. Mm-hmm. They get down there and they're like, oh, I got this. And then all of a sudden they start thinking about, I've put 3 arrows in there. I want this fourth one like so tight in there so I can take my picture. And then, and then the hiccup happens, which
goes into the wall.
Yeah.
Through the barn door.
Yeah. Which is common. Is it that way with your students too?
Yes. And there's kind of sine waves to what kind of days you'll have rolling. Some days it'll just feel effortless and your timing is so good and everything just lines up. And then the next time you come in, and it's usually when you're working on something, so you're overthinking, your timing is off, and you just get smashed, and you're like, man, I thought I was good at this. And then you have a day where you're like, I actually am terrible at this.
Yeah.
So I think that's, part of the process of getting better, but it's when something works in jiu-jitsu, it is nearly effortless, a sweep or just you're moving a whole other person, moving yourself, and it just happens. And then you're always chasing that,
Yeah. Have you had matches and stuff where you're just in a flow state?
Yes.
Where like when you watch back, you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I was like moving that smooth.
Yeah, absolutely. At some of my higher level competitions, and it did really help to compete a lot growing up.
Yeah.
In gymnastics or diving, you're kind of the only one out there. So if you mess up, everybody sees you, so you get used to that.
It's acclamation of performance.
And just being okay with losing and knowing, being confident enough as a person that if you lose, you can absorb it and move on and learn from it instead of just being crushed by it. So having that experience before I competed in jiu-jitsu, because I didn't start jiu-jitsu until I was 26, but I competed, at a very high level, and the sport is so small that I was going against, people who are multiple time world champions, which was very cool, the best in the world, literally. And, I held my own. A lot of times I got bronze one year in Worlds and silver in Pan Ams. That was kind of my best competition year. But having started so late in life and everything, and again, it is a smaller sport, especially for women, but it was, all of that competition experience leading up to it that I actually did better in the competition than I would do in the gym. And for a lot of people, they can't get their gym role to line up with their competitive role, but I was able to just focus on only what was going on in front of me and just react the best possible way. I did some of my best jiu-jitsu in those really big stages.
It's funny. I always feel that way too. I shouldn't say I'm not a good practicer, because I definitely have discipline when it comes to training. Like I really love the process of training, but I also have a very difficult time practicing at the intensity level of like what just happens when I'm at things. Like, it's like a different thing happens. Mm-hmm. And it's often a struggle for me to find that in practice. Now there were times specifically when I was competing a lot, like honestly competing more than I practiced, because it was just every weekend. And you kind of get to the point where there's probably at that time, there's probably 24 archers that I know were at a level that they were all good enough to win, but there were also probably 6 that had things clicking to where you just knew who was like, there were people that were going to always be like they're going to be looking at finals. Like they may not have made it, but you kind of know who those people are going to be. So it got to the point where I could really visualize who would be in my peer group targets. So I would kind of know like, okay, this is going to come down to, the top 4. And I was envisioning who was on like the bail with me, and you kind of get to know people too. And I remember one time practicing at my house, and I kind of went too deep. I was like calling to myself like, okay, here's what everyone's score is on this. I'm down by 3. This guy's here. I know what targets are left on the course, and this guy kind of suffers on this type of shot, and this guy is going to excel here. So, I'm kind of already in my head putting together like, if I'm clean from here on out, it's going to come down to still a sudden death arrow at the end. Mm-hmm. And there was a few times in my career where my finals were exactly something that I had like put together in my mind in a weird way and prepped for. But I would say 90% of my practice time in life as an athlete, I wasn't able to like get into game mode during practice. It was always very hard for me. Yeah. I know that I needed to drill, but like if someone just said, hey, if I was practicing at home and someone said, hey, closest to center, it's not like my mindset is not even close to the same as if, when I pack up that bow case and I'm heading somewhere knowing there's just a very different like feeling, and it seems like when I don't know if it's that person, but when that mindset comes out, the likelihood of flow state is like, it's within reach. Yes. Whether or not it happens, I don't know. It could, but flow state in practice is pretty rare for me. There's been a few times I can remember it ever happening. Yeah.
And jiu-jitsu, that's why a lot of people love it, and that's one of the reasons I love it. And it's in an open mat, you can get into that flow state.
Yeah, yes.
And it's different. You're not trying to win, but you're completely absorbed in your own movement and
feeling the intensity of the other person.
Yes.
Because sometimes people obviously are bringing a lot more serious game than maybe what you at first were in.
Often.
That. Yeah.
Often. I have a lot of fun when I roll. But so not necessarily trying to win, but being completely absorbed by what's happening right in front of you and your own movement. In a competition, there's a lot more force and speed, and you're thinking a little bit more strategy. You are trying to win a lot. For me, a lot more. I'm not worried about winning every transition when I'm in open mat. If I'm in competition practice, that's a little different. But it was hard for me to recreate that intensity outside of a competitive space also.
Have you find that sometimes when someone's trying to beat you really hard, like someone's really trying to like take it to you, but you're easily counteracting that. And then when you start to see the frustration build in there, I've had times where I've like got into flow states simply because I was like trying to feed the frustration. Have you ever had that where all of a sudden you realize like, actually I was freaking on a roll right there. And it was because you weren't thinking about it. What you were doing is enjoying the moment of like seeing frustration in someone else. Have you ever had that?
I wouldn't say.
Sounds like Andy every day. But.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. He has a little different outlook in jiu-jitsu. The Buds instructor comes out.
Does it?
A little bit. Yeah. He's like, oh, are you quitting? That's too bad. Did you just tap to a position? Oh,
after. That's him.
Yeah,
That's him.
I'm a little less like that, but I roll with newer people a lot, and you're so far ahead of them that you don't really have to think about it too much.
Plus you're like part of the gym.
Yeah, you can just kind of play around, and it's fun for you, but especially
you can't like anger people, whereas Andy can do it and then just like go home.
He's definitely become a mat enforcer. There's a mat enforcer at every gym. He's one of ours for sure. No, you just end up kind of having fun, and especially people get over it, but newer men particularly will get they assume, especially if they came out of a foundations class where I wasn't their teacher and they'd never seen me roll, they're like, okay, well, I'll go easy, kind of the first match. We do 3 matches with them for their very first rolls. And then the second one, they're like, okay, the spider monkey's coming out. Like they are going to jump on me or do something crazy because they expected it to be a little easier. And then, they're more exhausted. There's more adrenaline, and they're trying really hard. Some of the guys, because they were athletes, or they thought that they were good enough at fighting, in a certain way. And there's a lot of ego tied up to it. And they're like, I'm not going to get beaten by a smaller woman. And then,
they realize
the more tense they get, the more they're gripping, the more tired they get. And then they're on the bottom and they can't breathe, and they're exhausted. And I'm usually laughing at that point. And some of them can laugh with me. Some of them, it's not as good, but most of them get over. I mean, you have to get over it because they're going to go into open mat. They're going to be rolling with now guys that are black belts too. And, our other upper belts, and you have to lose a lot to get better. And so it's a pivot point for sure. Are they going to make it through that, or are they going to be too frustrated? But so those first rolls are kind of like that, where they're so like,
It's kind of an interesting statement. You got to lose a lot to get better, because that's one thing that I said on the Jocko podcast, that I've said that in front of other people who are really good athletes, and they almost, personally, I feel like you can't ignore it, but I made the statement, I had to learn how to lose before I could learn how to win.
Yes. I really enjoyed listening to that, actually, that Jocko podcast, for a few reasons, but it was some great sports mindset stuff.
Because some people are so set, and honestly, have you ever did much for sports psychology? I haven't dove super deep into it, but I've tried to learn personality types. First, I tried to learn it so that I could actually be less frustrated on teams, because obviously on teams, most of the teams I was in some type of a leadership role, or I knew I was whether you say I was going to be one of the varsity leaders or starters or whatever, but I had to deal with these other personalities, and some of the ego-driven mentalities versus task-driven. I'm very task-driven. And my performances come out from task, not from raw natural talent or the ego aspect. But I've definitely been on teams and been around coaches where the philosophy and the motto is refuse to lose. And for some people, especially ones that were always naturally gifted and they had that mentality, once they realize other people get better, maybe you were developed earlier and now other people have hit maturity, other people now have body size or coordination or muscle, or other people have had the same coaching as your dad, bringing you up and teaching you this stuff since you were 5, and all of a sudden it's that level, that playing field starts to get level.
Yeah.
And that refuse to lose also becomes this massive derailer for some people. Yep. And so it's cool to hear that from someone that I respect a lot, being yourself, learning to lose so that you can go forward. I think it has to happen.
It's critical. And you don't focus on performance if you're only looking at the outcome, so you can't improve technically.
Yeah.
And you'll see people rolling and they're getting so mad, and you'll see it even in high level competitors. They're so emotional, they're so angry, so they're fighting their opponent but themselves as well at the same time, and you don't have space to do both. If the other person's as good as you have to be completely in that flow state, completely focused on what you're doing, and the emotion doesn't really help you. Yeah,
I agree. Bow hunting and archery is that way. I'm just going to tell you right now, because obviously you've learned there's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And then of course, Andy, dropping a nuclear bomb on everybody, at the end of the day says okay, well, you guys know how much stuff you're thinking about now. Well, wait till you go bow hunting. So now you got to do all that in 7 seconds. And he's
with wind.
And he's and then you're going to have wind and the collar's over here and there's trees falling down and lava coming out. And he's freaking painting the worst possible.
I know. And he doesn't acknowledge how much of his former training. He's oh yeah, I just went out and killed something in a few weeks. And I was you had so many of the prerequisite skills and nerves of steel and everything else. I was maybe you did. I'm going to take some time.
I mean, he's obviously, Andy is a very good student.
Yeah.
I mean, he 100% focuses on the basics, and he is a robot at repeating that stuff until you say, hey, remember how I told you to do that? Don't ever do that again. I want you to do this now. Otherwise, he's just going to keep doing what you taught him to begin with. Mm-hmm. But I remember the first time him and I were stalking in, and I'm communicating just like I would a hunter when I'm, and I think I had him on my hip, so I'm just kind of like navigating him through. And then there was a point where I kind of said, like, you get here, I'm going to get here, and kind of check this situation out. And then I remember looking at him, and I was thinking, like, it was probably from like a movie, but I'm like, I don't know, like the hand sign, like the SEAL, like hand signals. So I'm going like, and he's just going. And so like after that event, I go, hey, like, what are your hand signals, like your SEAL team hand signals? And he's just like, I don't know. You could have just said like one bear over there. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, like a first base coach, like trying to get. He goes, yeah, that's just in the movies. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they usually had pretty good radios.
He's like, he goes, if I'm he taught me like squeezing. He goes, actually, if I'm on your hip, like that's normal. Yeah. And he would say like, I can, we do a lot with like confirming things, not by talking. Cause he's like, obviously, you're not doing a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and those proved to be helpful, but yeah, for him, when it came, like Andy immediately has that face when he knows, like, if he knows a broadhead's getting ready to launch, yeah, he's making the face. And he's also, I also know going in that, like, he's used to, like, if he's got a full mag, he's probably going to rip that full mag off. So like I told him, like, hey dude, if just because you have 5 arrows in the quiver doesn't mean like once you make that shot, like it doesn't mean just keep cacking off around. Yeah. And he's just like, well, why? He's like, I've waited like 4 months to like be able to like launch. And I'm just like, no, you just don't do that.
Dial it back a little bit.
Yeah. It's called your taxidermist is going to hate you.
So many holes.
Yeah. Just sitting there sewing the whole time. Like, damn, Andy, what is up? Well, what do you want to end with? Like, is there a subject that you want to talk about? Was there anything where you're like, I would like to be able to talk to this? You
did ask me yesterday, as a female that was learning archery, if there was anything that,
yeah, that's a good topic.
Kind of struck me, yeah, because you haven't had a ton of female students, or maybe it seems like it's a minority. Even just you were talking about the arrow manufacturing, just lighter arrows that you would use for smaller people or for women.
You made a good statement. You said, what'd you say? You said something in pinkett
or trinket. Yeah, that's what.
Like for women stuff, that was like the motto, which I was like, oh dang, okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, I feel like one of the things that's critical, and this is a good topic, is getting the equipment that's right for someone depending on their size. Mm-hmm. And I mean, because Sharon is small, she's small. So if I put a full-size bow in her hands, or if I got a 70-pound bow and tried to back it all the way down, like that's problematic. So for you guys, your bows took quite a while to get here because and you got, I even told Andy, I said, listen, I would recommend you spending more on their bows than what you do on your own. Like, get them the carbon models so they're light in their hand. Let's custom order light limbs to where they're able to shoot their limbs, maxed out so they have good string tension. Make sure it's coming with the right cams to where they're at a good position within that cam to where it still feels good and they're still getting good speed. And, and then obviously for your arrows, I mean, it'd be easy for me to give you really any of the arrows that we have in stock. But the reality is, like, Sharon, I think I started Sharon at 30 pounds max. Mm-hmm. Her and Harry both. I had 30-pound bows for them. They were very small, but they could pull them back and they wouldn't get tired in 5 shots. Yeah. I could actually go out and say, let's shoot for 20 minutes and we could drill, because obviously if you go at 100%, like rolling all the time, just people can't you just get burned out. So
Right.
like you have to be able to have reps. So for them, I ordered it in poundages, and then as they got to where I could physically see that was easy for them, at that point, buy 40-pound limbs and get the bow rebuilt with 40-pound limbs and get arrows to match so that their grouping is showing them what their dedication is putting. You want to be able to give feedback that at least is a representation of like how they're doing. Because if you have arrows that aren't matched for a bow, even if you're making good shots, I would still have to tell you like, hey, those aren't going to group as good as if this arrow totally matched. And unfortunately, right now, there's a struggle for a lot of companies to get certain types of materials, and the industry is just like doing really well right now. So for you guys to get your arrows, which I wanted a 600 spine arrow for you guys, and I wanted it in a high quality shaft. I didn't want to just get one that had low tolerances to where, at 40 yards, your groups would be triple what you were really shooting. I wanted an arrow that was, straight, consistent. I wanted to make sure they all weighed the same. So, you pay a price for a better product,
Right.
but it also allows the student to really see how good they're doing. And I know it's all budget based,
Right.
But what you want to have something that as people are actually progressing, you're able to show them like, hey, you are doing good. Or you also want to be able to say like, listen, here, let me shoot this for you. This is what it can do. You're just not doing it. Like,
Right.
I never like equipment to hold someone back. And I refer to like, I shot, or when I played golf, I always just got my dad's hand-me-down golf clubs. So my dad's not as tall as me. So I just like played golf for a long time, just having to like really bend myself too low to the ground to play with those clubs. And then I think I was like 21 or something. My dad's like, he's like, hey, let's go to town. So we went to town and he took me to a golf shop, and I'm like, what are we doing? He goes, I'm going to buy your first pair of custom clubs for your birthday. And so I got fitted, I got custom clubs, and I went out and was on the driving range, and I kind of like got to actually like stand up for the first time. Yeah. And when they were fitting me for the clubs and they were testing like what the head angle was on the ground just based on my natural swing, and then gave me a different like length shaft and everything. And they're like, hey, your club speed, you're pretty much swing like a gorilla. So if you have this really weak, shaft with that much leverage, your club face is like whipping back, and it's like causing these slices, because even though your swing isn't bad, the equipment is like contorting to like the power,
right.
So
yeah, so I can imagine if someone just tried to hand their wife or girlfriend their bow, but just with the poundage dialed down, that they're going to have some success, but they're going to hit a plateau where it's going to be really frustrating.
Yep.
So yeah, just having something that actually fits you, and outdoor equipment too, now that Sitka's actually making women's specific gear.
Yeah.
They, women's specific jiu-jitsu uniforms are relatively new, and women are not shaped like men.
No.
I've ripped 3 pairs of pants completely in half. My hips, they don't fit in men's pants.
Yeah.
They just don't. And so that was, a huge leap forward. I don't have any men's gis anymore. They just don't fit as well. And I'm in one every single day, so I want one that actually fits.
Yeah. I'm surprised that didn't come along sooner. Did you tailor yours sooner? Did you just?
No. I mean, because you need more material in the hips. So you would just get, a size that kind of fit.
Up.
And they used to be cut a lot bigger too. And as they got more specific to the sport, you want a kind of tighter gi for jiu-jitsu. So they got cut smaller and smaller. And then before you know it, you're ripping pants. So yeah, that's improved. But you're just forced, if you're forced to use the wrong equipment, that's not easy. I would also say that it's very hard to learn from your partner, from a spouse. That's challenging. I mean, I'm sure, when teaching Sharon that you guys had some moments that were a little bit tense. For snowboarding,
she the one thing with Sharon is, one, she's a very good student too. We actually had probably less trouble than the only trouble we've had has never been like Sharon not wanting to like value what I'm telling her, because she knows, one, I think she could do presentations on her own because she's been to so many of mine to where she knows what I'm talking about and she can see it firsthand. And there's also times where people like send me messages while we're eating dinner or whatever, and I'll just kind of be like, what do you think of this? And she'll be like, yeah, his hips are forward, front shoulders up.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, yep, that's right. The majority of like I shouldn't say negativity, but the biggest disconnect from our husband and wife coaching is the fact that I probably don't like make it easier for her to practice more, or like force her to practice. I shouldn't say force her to practice, but like she likes to shoot, but it's not like I'm like, hey, let's go shoot, or hey, I'm going to show you a bunch of exercises to where you can pull more weight, or, I've always just kind of, it's just hard because it's what I do every day.
Right.
So at some point I want, if I'm with Sharon, it's like, let's talk about wine and, cheeses and, what kind of new Frisbee we're going to get for Luna, or like something like that, you know?
I think, for a lot of beginners in snowboarding, I would see people like break up on the hill, their boyfriend's trying to teach them to snowboard and it's just not
I've
going
seen that
well.
from the chairlift.
Yeah.
I've heard like,
it's not good.
I told you I didn't want to come, but you're making me come.
Yeah.
I don't even like this board.
Well, I imagine for archery too, if you can get another instructor, at least initially, to learn the basics, that would probably be better received in a lot of cases, So I think it would have, Andy has taught me some pistol, and, he's so good at it. And, but it can be a little hard sometimes. And, his jiu-jitsu coach now is more Travis, which is good. So there's kind of a layer of, we'll have conversations about it. We still, we'll kind of figure things out, certain techniques together, but, I would say Travis is more his main coach now. And I think having that degree of separation, if you want your wife or girlfriend to get into something and not cause a rift, I think that's smart. So if you have a friend or another instructor, like let them learn the basics from someone else.
It's good advice to one, not try to shortchange them getting in, like give them the option to make choices for themselves.
Yep.
And then put them in front of someone that can give them lessons where you're not putting the pressure on them of like, watching that. And that was nice yesterday with Andy. He took a back burner, and then kind of came in at the end. And the only thing he really stepped in at was like knocking the arrow, which was the biggest thing you stumped me on. You're like, hey, like, we haven't talked about, like, you just load your arrows so easy. Like, hands? What's the way to do it? And I go, oh, it's easy. Just like, and so I like said, here, let me have your line. I'm like standing behind you trying to do it. And I'm like, I don't know how I do it. I'm like, I think I use this finger, but then I change over. And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't even know where I grab the arrow. So Andy's like trying to show you, and I could see you're just like, let go, let him tell me.
Well, he took it from me, and I was like, I can see you do it, but I'm not doing it, so.
Well, I don't know how to, I know how to teach archery. I just don't know how to teach how to load an arrow in a string, because I was like, oh yeah, I freaking have never like done this. So.
No one has asked that? What did they do? They just figured it out better than I did, I guess. I don't know.
I have no idea. I have no idea. That was just one of those nuances where I was like, I have no idea.
Or having the release the right way. I mean,
yeah, that was a big one. You guys were shooting releases backwards.
I'm
for a
a
while.
little dyslexic, so it's sometimes things get kind of flipped.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they definitely were then. Well, thanks so much for coming. This was awesome, and I'm so happy that you and Andy met each other too, because like you were like a godsend for him at a time where I think, I know it was, I remember when he told me about you and like and I think he was a little bit like nervous, just, cause we talked about this with Andy. He should have got out of his previous situation way sooner, but he just doesn't quit things. And so he just like kept riding it out, and it wasn't healthy. And so then I think him telling me about you was kind of a way of also saying like, I've officially, like that whole, like there's no going back. I've like totally, I've moved on from that. And I think he was surprised, where I was just like so freaking excited for him and like pumped for him. Cause I'm just like, he deserves it. He deserves a good person, cause he's such a good person too. And it's awesome how freaking intense you are with certain sport too. And I think it's awesome that, you're better than him at jiu-jitsu as well. That's gonna be awesome to just freaking keep him in check. So make sure you don't ever like let that slide. Always keep
I already have a pretty hard time with him.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah.
Dang it.
Yeah.
Dang it.
No, I had about a 6 month to a year kind of reign of terror, and now he's a purple belt level, and he's an athlete. He's a good learner. So unfortunately, yeah. But I so appreciate you saying that, because you are a true friend to him, and he's a public facing figure. So there's a lot of people around him or that want to be close to him, but there's only a few that are really looking out for him and really good friends. So I appreciate you.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was relieved. And then obviously once we met, Sharon and I both just think the world of you. We're like, dude, I mean, she can come and you don't have to.
Moving to Iowa.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how he took that when I'm like, hey, do you want a job? You told me, you're like, that one time you were like totally hammered and you offered a job, and then Sharon's like, oh no, he totally meant that. He might have been hammered, but he totally meant that.
We're recruiting. Yeah. Jiu-jitsu instructor / arrow fletcher.
So true. Well, awesome. I appreciate it. And knock on, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Be sure to check out knockonarchery.com for our full line of custom designed products, as well as free in-depth education and bow hunting entertainment to help you shoot at your best.